My Lords, it's a pleasure but daunting to follow the noble Lord the Earl of Lytton, who has been a font of knowledge on the issues in this bill. And it is a significant bill, and one which many have been waiting for, because its provisions will have far-reaching consequences for so many householders, but also the whole industry of building construction. It's also a very technical bill that I've struggled with, and I'm unlikely to be able to contribute in detail at committee stage. However, for second reading, I thought my recent experience as a leaseholder might be useful. In April 2020, in the depth of the first lockdown, there was a house fire in my council block of Maisonettes in Haringey. The fire rapidly spread across the roof of the block and created a huge blaze. Thankfully, no one was hurt, but 17 fire engines later and a lot of shaken up people, the whole block suffered major water damage. Myself and all the families were evacuated, and we thought that that would be just for a couple of months. In reality, the due date for return is this April, 2 years after the fire. This delay has had a devastating impact on many people, my neighbours especially, more than me. But the reason I'm telling you this is not for any sympathy, but to note that sometimes it's not the safety of a building or even the fire that causes the suffering, but rather how officialdom handles it. In this instance, the context was COVID restrictions and a safety-first approach, which became an excuse for inexcusable inaction and humane indifference. And an atmosphere of excessive precaution in terms of the coronavirus led to a local government housing department seeming to seize up and consigned leaseholders and tenants to being made effectively homeless for 2 years. I tell this tale because one concern I have is that there are always dangers when responding to something as horrific or emotional as the Grenfell tragedy, that we bend the stick and focus on zero risk and safety first above all other considerations. This can lead to unintended consequences. So now there's a scramble to require building owners to review a fire risk assessment on all residential buildings, but this can be time-consuming and expensive a business. And most importantly, we need to ask, is it proportionate or necessary on such a wide scale? Southwark Council has recently announced extra intrusive fire safety checks in hundreds of its high-rises, invoking not only involving not only surveys of outside buildings and communal areas, but the council will, quote, enter homes with a camera and, quote, may need to open up walls and ceilings. This is not because there are any defined risks, but it's an exploratory, just-in-case fishing exercise, it seems to me. While it's posed as putting tenants' safety first, we must ask if this sort of action, which is massively disruptive for households, is the top safety threat to people in South London. To note, the LGA has noted that their concerns about these new financial burdens and the impact on social housing blocks of such surveys and all of the remediation that has to happen, and that they warn that this could, the burden for this could fall on council housing revenue accounts, housing associations, and, quote, punish social housing tenants and those on waiting lists. The point is, the vast majority of homes in the UK are safe, my lords. The noble Lord, the Minister, himself noted in his very helpful letter that evidence of fire suggests that only a small proportion of fires in high-risk buildings escape the room of origin, and there's a general downward trend in the number of deaths from fires in people's homes over the last 2 decades, and thank God for that. But overall, the evidence shows risk is low across all accommodations and buildings. So partly I think we need to consider if blanket mandates affect priorities and resources. The LGA again queries whether height is an effective determinant of risk or too simplistic, sometimes neglecting other factors such as vulnerability of occupants. But also, this catch-all treats all buildings over 18 metres as dangerous when they are not, forcing the use of, quote, scarce resources unnecessarily, which could be deployed to life-saving effect elsewhere. The mandate to investigate every building and historic remediation to happen is explained as a way of reassuring residents and leaseholders that their homes are safe, rather than it's explained as a necessity. But I worry that sometimes reassuring measures might inadvertently create a disproportionate sense and escalating fears amongst the public. So I'm suggesting that we don't allow the horrors of Grenfell and the egregious negligence there to create the impression that we should all be fearful in our homes all the time. That's one reason why I'm glad the bill stresses throughout that the new building safety regime will be proportionate, rather than the overuse of the precautionary principle. Health and safety gone mad might be a caricatured take on those who are cavalier about regulations. However, there are some destructive features of health and safety cultures that can lead to, for example, a focus on myriad possible risks rather than those clearly defined dangers, and a micromanagement of unknown risks with everything seen as a potential hazard. And this can lead to a defensive focus on compliance and the proliferation of petty regulations that can mean we lose sight of the regulations that really matter, and in turn, all this might lead to formalised procedures in which box ticking can usurp human judgment and create an army of new box ticking bureaucrats and a new industry and layer upon layer of regulators with new roles that can be very confusing. Already we can see that these new layers of bureaucracy is creating a skills crisis and a capacity problem. Of course, I'm keen to see more fire engineers and surveyors and so on, but with the new focus on competence and upskilling of those presently involved in building construction, we must avoid also suggesting that there's widespread incompetence. I worry about inadvertently demonising the 2 million people involved in the construction industry. And can I urge my noble lords to avoid characterising the majority of contractors, designers, builders and architects as incompetent cowboys cutting corners? Isn't this name-calling just another part of blame culture? And it might be that I have a disproportionate high number in my family who work in the construction industry. But I do think we need a balance. This industry is crucial to building the desperately needed new homes, hospitals, factories, and to make the levelling up agenda concrete. We don't want them all demoralised, stuck in an endless continuing professional development seminars, tangled up in, yes, red tape, treated with suspicion as dodgy hostile players by the public. We must resist the temptation, therefore, of demonising everybody in this game.